All right, DeRay Mckesson is here. He hosts Pod Save the People on our old friends Crooked Media, and he is one of the people running Campaign Zero, which is launching a new campaign, 8can'twait.org, 8, the number 8, can'twait.org. And this is something, this has been, 6 years now of your life putting this together?
Yeah, so I was on the original protests in Ferguson in 2014. We were in the street for 400 days. And once those protests ended, I went back home to Baltimore and Freddie Gray got killed. But we stepped back and we were like, something is systemic. We don't know what the systemic is. We don't know why this is happening all across the country in a consistent pattern across time and place. So we launched Campaign Zero, which was this idea of like, we can live in a world where the police don't kill anybody, right? It's not campaign half. It's not campaign almost. It's Campaign Zero. And we were trying to figure out solutions. So for the past 6 years, we have been really laser focused on what solutions look like. And we know so much more than we did before.
So for the people listening, I think it's important to note, I think there's two tactics going forward, for lack of a better word. One is, the election in November. People know what to do. If you want things to change, there it is. The other one is just learning more about not only police brutality, but how to stop it. And I was on a Zoom call that you had today for a bunch of people where you basically laid out all this, can't wait, and, the mechanics behind it and stuff. And it's all of this simple stuff that you guys are saying would reduce violence by 72% with police. And all things that are easier to achieve than I thought, that I realized. I didn't realize it would, a mayor could change his mind on something in 3 days and stuff like that. So can you walk through the part where different cities, how easy it is to change some of this stuff?
Yeah, can we zoom out though and just talk about the context that we sit in and like what's going on with police violence?
Yeah, let's do that first. Go.
So, just for context, is that a third of all the people killed by a stranger in the United States are actually killed by a police officer. In March and April of 2020, the police killed as many people as they did in March and April of 2019. So COVID, quarantine, it actually had no impact on the police killing people, even though people were in their homes, even though there's a historic decrease in crime, because nobody's outside, the police actually still killed the same number of people and at the same rate, which is sort of wild, right? So when we look at this, we're reminded too that 2019 was the first year ever where Black people were more afraid of being killed by a police officer than being killed by community violence. Like, that is wild. So we look at this context and say, it makes sense to us that this started in Minneapolis this time. You know why? Because in Minneapolis, Black people are 13 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than white people. It's the highest racial disparity with regard to police violence that exists in the country. The average is 3 times. The average Black person is 3 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a white person. It also makes sense to us why in St. Louis it started in 2014. Because St. Louis has, since 2013, had the highest rate of police violence across the country, right? So when we think about solutions, a solution has to do 2 things. It has to both change police behavior and change the outcomes. One of the things that does that so effectively, but is operated under the radar, is use of force policies. There are 8 policies that we track across the country. And these 8 policies, when a department goes from none of these policies to all of these policies, it can result in a 72% reduction in police violence. And the beautiful thing is that they're all really simple. So they're things like requires de-escalation. So it requires officers, if they can, put space in between them and another person. If they can talk somebody down, it requires them to use different methods and tactics that might de-escalate. Things like banning chokeholds and strangleholds seems really simple, but only 28 of the 100 largest police departments even ban chokeholds and strangleholds today. And remember,
well, you said in your research, New York overturned that, right?
Yeah, so New York, what makes New York so interesting is that New York actually banned chokeholds a long time ago in the 60s. It was the first major police department in the country, and New York is the biggest police department in the country, to ban chokeholds. And then quietly, after Garner gets killed, de Blasio lifts the ban on chokeholds. And the way that he lifts the ban is actually really sneaky. So if you read the New York City policy, it says chokeholds are banned. And then on the next page, it says everything that was banned on the page before can actually be unbanned on a case-by-case basis of a committee that is for police officers. And you're like, well, that's not a ban anymore. If it can be unbanned on a case-by-case basis, it's not a ban. So Minneapolis, chokeholds aren't banned in Minneapolis, but in the majority of cities, chokeholds aren't banned. Only 28 of the 100 cities. And remember, there's a difference between a chokehold and a stranglehold. A chokehold is your Adam's apple, it's your airway. A stranglehold is the muscles in your neck restricting blood flow to your head. Both have similar impact, but there are some places, for instance, that ban chokeholds and don't ban strangleholds. They both need to be banned. And then things like, is there a duty to intervene? So does an officer have a required to intervene if they see another officer engaged in misconduct, right? And we want that to happen. The only way that those 3 officers got fired in Minneapolis is because activists pressed for a duty to intervene clause in the use of force policy in Minneapolis. So those other officers were held responsible because they didn't do anything, as that officer in Minneapolis had his foot on Mr. Floyd's neck, leading to his death, right? We also track, can you shoot into moving vehicles? Why should you be shooting into moving vehicles? You shouldn't, right? And that's common sense. You shoot somebody who's driving a car, they die. What happens to the car? Keeps going and it kills somebody, right? So there are 8 of these things, and you can find them out. 8can'twait.org is what is launching tomorrow. It's a campaign about how do we make sure that we end these 8 things. How do we make sure that we put in these policies? Because these policies will save lives.
So you found, and one of the things that was so hard with this research is you couldn't get a lot of the policies from the different police departments, right? You couldn't even find out what they actually had, in their code of conduct stuff.
Yeah, so what's interesting, here's what we say, right? Is that it's a low bar that you should know the rules by which the police can kill you. We think that is like sort of just like a low bar. But police departments all across the country, these are secret. Like
Right.
they don't publish them. So it took us a couple years to even get all the use of force policies for the 100 biggest cities. We had to fight some cities like El Paso, Texas, Birmingham. We had to actually find lawyers who had sued the city, and we had to get it from them. This was not very easy, but we did it. And what's powerful about it is for the first time, we actually can compare policies across the country. This is the first ever database that has existed like this. And we've actually seen legislators reach out to us being like, finally, we have comparative data. Finally, we can actually see the language that exists in other cities. And that's actually really powerful.
And then you also had the actual data on how somebody died seems to vary depending on who you listen to. So you had to sort out all of that too, right?
Yeah. So, there are a couple of databases about police violence. We manage the most comprehensive database about police violence in the country. The big one that people know is the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post database we like the Washington Post. They only capture people who got killed on duty by an on-duty officer with a gun. So Eric Garner's not in their database because he was not killed with a gun. Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis is not in their database because he was not killed with the gun. If you remember Botham Jean, who was killed by Amber Geiger when she walked into his apartment in the middle of the night and shot him dead, she was off duty when that happened. So that's not included in the Washington Post database. So our database is the only database in the country that's all on duty, off duty killings, all weapons where the police officer contributed to the death of a person. So our data has been used in over 1,200 studies just in the past 3 or 4 years, which is really powerful. And this data is data that we also have to clean and help fill in the gaps, because in America, if you get killed by a police officer and the media does not write about it, then you don't exist. And that is sort of wild.
So you're almost approaching this, because I know 538 has done some stuff too. You're matching this data from different places and trying to paint this picture that becomes irrefutable after a while, right? Where you're just like, look at why did this department that has all these safer methods? Hey, what a coincidence. They're having less incidents. Why can't everybody do this? And at some point, it almost becomes like sports where, like in the NBA, it's like, hey, if you shoot more threes, you're going to score more points. At some point, somebody's going to look at this data and have the same realization, right? Why wouldn't that happen yet?
Yeah, one of the things that is true is that the data analysis is pretty new. So we are the first people ever to crunch data like this. It's the first database like this that's ever existed. So some of it is that it's new. When we identified that these 8 policies matter disproportionately more than other things, that's the first study like this has ever been done. So there are a set of legislators and other people who want to do right, who literally just didn't have access to this information because it didn't exist. So we are sympathetic to that. But now that we know, it means that we must act, right? Now that we know, And what's cool about it is that in almost every city, the mayor has almost unilateral power to impact these changes today. Mayors and police chiefs could put these 8 policies in place. They would save lives. Like, that is a really powerful thing. And we want to normalize the fact that people can talk about policy, that people can look up the policies in their own state or their own cities. We start with the 100 largest cities and then every city in California, and we are slowly branching out.
And one other thing that you've learned is that police cams have not really worked to curb violence, which doesn't make any sense, but that's what the data shows.
Yeah, so there are 5 things that don't work. So body cameras, the data is clear that they do not change police behavior in a scalable way. There are some studies that suggest that there might be minor changes to police behavior, but again, it's not in a way that we can scale. The next 2 are about training. So there are 2 trainings that are often bandied as solutions. Both of those change police officers' attitudes, not their behavior. So the first is implicit bias. So implicit bias is a training where they uncover the bias that officers have about race or about gender or identity. And the best studies show us that officers who are predisposed to those messages going in come out with the greatest attitude changes. But in general, it doesn't change their behavior. Same thing with mental health training. There's actually very new research, just a few months old, about mental health training. And it shows that training police officers to engage in mental health crises in a different way doesn't change their behavior. We actually probably should just have mental health experts do that work. The fourth is around the number of Black officers, and this is actually where it gets interesting. The number of Black officers does matter, but it doesn't matter until we get to 35% of the force being Black. Now, here's
Wow. Why is that?
So I don't know why it is. This is just what the research shows us. It's a very cool graph. So you see it. It doesn't matter. You get 35% of the police department, and then it actually goes. The number of people killed goes down.
Wow.
The challenge with this, because the challenge which makes this not a scalable solution, is that only 12 of the 18,000 police departments that exist have over 30% Black composition. So it's just not a scalable solution. And the fifth is community policing. This is the one we hear a lot. It's this idea that if the community and police trusted each other more, that the outcomes would be better. And two problems with this. We would say this idea is racist at its core, that it's only Black and brown people and poor people that we'd ever say, you know what? The police need to go play football with my kid to treat him like a whole human being. Or like, why does the police have to take my daughter out to get ice cream to not shoot her in the forehead and treat her like a child, right? That's a racist idea. We never offer that idea around white people or people in affluent communities. Like, if you know them better, you'll actually not kill them, you'll treat them better. That would be unacceptable. But also the data is clear that community policing, it does actually change the attitudes of the police, and it changes the attitudes of community members. It just doesn't change the outcomes with which they use force or the frequency with which officers use force. Those 5 things don't matter.
And one of the things you guys are really passionate about that I never really thought of extensively until you were laying everything out on the Zoom was, why do we need this many guns with the police? Why can't we deploy different people in the unit in different ways? And why can't some people just be cops that don't have guns? And why do we need this much machinery behind doing that job?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we don't. So we think about the strategy as 2-pronged. It's reduce the power of the police, and that's what we focus on with 8 Can Wait. That is about reducing the power that they have to inflict harm in communities. And what's powerful about that strategy is that the police will say things like, if you restrict our ability to use force, then it makes us less safe. You don't know what it's like to be a police officer. And if you say that we can't use chokeholds and we're in a dangerous situation, then this doesn't make us safe. What the data shows is that in the places with the most restrictive policies, the police are the safest and community members are the safest. It also shows that there's no change in crime because the police will say, you know what, okay, enact those policies and the city will be more dangerous. The data does not show that's true. But the whole second strategy is what you talk about. It's about shifting the role of the police and about shrinking the role of it. The second strategy is about shrinking the role of the police, right? So when we look at the data nationally, of all the arrests that happen in the country, only 5% of the arrests happen for violent crime. Only 5%, right? That's an FBI number. That's not like a DeRay Mckesson special. That is an FBI number for more than 20 years. Only 5% of the arrests happen for violent crime. But we staff and resource police departments as if it is 50, 60, 70% of arrested for violent crime. That's just not the case. So we don't need somebody with a gun going to a mental health crisis. We don't need somebody with a gun going to a car crash. We don't need somebody with a gun trying to find a missing kid. So we should shift all those resources away from police departments, and we should shift all those responsibilities away from police departments. And we should narrow the scope so finely so that the only things that we have any sort of armed intervention is so small that like we don't need whole forces of police to do these things. And that is a real solution. That's not a Pollyanna solution. The majority of what happens with 911 is not things that require armed intervention. And we just don't need a police apparatus the way that we have today.
So you said in 2014, I just couldn't believe that the police would fire tear gas into what had been a peaceful protest. I was running around face burning and nothing I saw looked like America to me. You said that in 2015 about Ferguson in 2014 to the New York Times. You could take that quote right now and that would be everything that's happened over the last week. I thought 2014 was going to be this sea change moment in a lot of different ways. And not only was it not a sea change moment, um, it seems like the numbers have not gone down in any respect. What happened these last 6 years? Why didn't things get better, in your opinion?
Yeah, so the numbers didn't go down. The numbers went up. The police kill on average 1,100 people a year. The number of people killed since 2014 has not dipped below the 2014 number at all. So what happened? You know, I think what happened with us is that we learned more than we ever knew, right? So now that we have the data, we know the analysis, like we actually know what the levers are. We didn't know in 2014 what the structural levers were. We knew that there were laws, policies, and practices that we had a hunch that they were wrong, but we had no clue. We didn't know anything about police shooting contracts. We didn't know, for instance, there's a law in California that says that any investigation of an officer that lasts more than a year can never result in discipline, regardless of the outcome, right? We didn't know there's a law in Oregon that says that an officer can use deadly force if they think you just committed a felony or if they think you're about to commit a felony. That's wild. We didn't know those things existed. We didn't know that in Chicago, they destroy police officer disciplinary records every 5 years, so that in Portland and Seattle, the contracts say the officer has to be disciplined in the least embarrassing manner before the public. We didn't know that in Minneapolis, there's a clause that says that they can have community oversight, but the Community Oversight Board can never have the power to discipline an officer. We just didn't know these structural things, right? We know now. And because we know, we can actually be more focused in how we press and how we fight on. And I'm hopeful about that, right? I think that 2014 was the awakening for so many people. I think about 2020 as a chance that we get the changes that people promised us in 2014, but didn't have the political courage to follow through on.
Why do you think this became such a moment these last, I don't know, 7 days? If you had to say one thing, what would it be? Because for me, I would say the video was so horrifying and so inexplicable. It's like literally watching somebody get murdered that I think people couldn't shake that. But then you bring in all of these other things and now you have where we are now. What do you think it was? Do you think it was something different?
You know, I think that, and you remember 2014. 2014, we went to like you went to a million panels, we read all this. It was people like were building their understanding of issues around race all across the country, right? It was like people listened to podcasts. Like it was about, people were just like learning so much, right? I think that now it's like people know the information, they built their capacity on it, like all that. We don't have to. 2014, we were doing a lot of work building people's understanding about racism and structure, all this stuff. We don't have to do that now. We did it, right? That was actually the important work that happened over the past 5 years. So we're at a moment now where people are like, I get it. They saw that video. They're like, this is screwed up. Like, they are ready for action, right? They already get it. And I think that's what you're seeing right now. Also, I think there's a set of newer people to the protest who are like, okay, we saw those people in the street last time. You promised some things and you didn't follow through. So we don't believe you, which is why people are staying in the street. And that makes total sense to me.
Do you think that the fact that Trump has become such a reviled president in so many circles actually helps this movement in a lot of ways because people want to rally around different things?
I think that, here's the thing. There's not much positive or anything positive that's coming out of the White House from Trump, certainly around race and justice. I'm also mindful that the police has very little to do with that the president has little to do with local policing. There are 18,000 police departments. It's mayors, governors, city councils. Like that actually is where the power is. So we've seen Trump exercise the full extent of the president's power, which is like calling in the National Guard, potentially calling in the military to sort of screw around in cities. And the DOJ does fund the majority of police departments, but the DOJ has never conditioned that funding on anything substantive. So the president really doesn't have a big impact on local policing. The president does manage the three biggest police departments in the country, as you can imagine. They have Border Patrol, one of the biggest police departments in the country, ICE, which we know ICE detains more people than they've ever detained at the daily rate in the history of the country. It's about 60,000 people are detained each day by ICE. And then the FBI, which is a domestic police force. So these three agencies are managed by the president, and that is not insignificant. But local police departments are really local issues.
And the mayors have way more power than they want to let on with this stuff. These guys, we have Garcetti, who's been on this podcast in Los Angeles, who's on TV every night. He has more power to change at least some of this stuff than maybe he's letting on, right?
Yeah, so Garcetti, so the police commission is an actual structure in LA, and the police commission does have the sort of has to be involved in any policy changes with regard to the police and the police department. But Garcetti, the mayor, appoints those people. So the mayor has a lot of power. The mayor manages the police department. The mayor manages what policies would move and not. So yeah, the mayor has a lot of power. Mayors like to say, they like to be like, we're taking the lead from the police. It's a hard job, We want to create the pressure to say community members have asked for these changes and want these changes to happen right now. And the most mayors have the power to do that. No legislation, don't need a whole lot of hearings. They actually can move very quickly.
All right, so let's take Garcetti, because that's the one I probably know the best because I live here. Let's say he calls you and says, I need help. Give me 3 things I need to be doing right now. What are the 3 things you'd say?
So we want to ban, we want to put in place all 8 policies, and we want to do that very quickly. In LA, we also want to cancel a contract with Lexipol. So Lexipol is a third party that 95% of the police departments in California outsource their policy writing to this police-led think tank, and then they're bad. We want to ban that today. And then in LA, we want to do a set of reforms about how the police interact in communities. So there are things that seemingly are much smaller. So the LAPD stops Black people disproportionately more than other races with no pretext, with no probable cause. They just stop and search them, and the data shows that. So there are a host of those practices that we want the police to stop immediately in LA.
Police unions have been written about a lot these last few days, and they have a lot more power than I think a lot of people knew, with protecting officers, protecting people who made mistakes, all kinds of things. How does that get solved? How do we get everybody to be able to work with them so that they can try to solve this too? Or do you think they're even interested in solving it?
So the police unions are like that'll be a whole podcast. The police unions are really hard. We manage a whole project around police unions. It's called checkthepolice.org. So to show you the clauses in police union contracts that are really dangerous and don't help us out with accountability or public safety. And the police unions have been the single biggest impediment to these changes across the country. There have been a lot of police chiefs who really aren't awful, like who get it, who are fine. But union leaders have not been helpful when the rubber meets the road. So I'd encourage people, if you're interested in the union stuff, to go to checkthepolice.org and check your police union contract. But in terms of what we do about them, the union strategy is a little bit more long-term. It's like a 2 to 5 year strategy, because most police union contracts last for about 4 years. So we can't really renegotiate them until it expires, right? And then we can go in and do some good work. So, in Austin, we worked with the protesters there to change their police union contract. They did it, and it was incredible. We're working similarly with people in Portland, Oregon right now to change the police union contract. But it's a longer strategy. I already named some of the clauses that exist in these contracts, but it's really hard, and the contract is why in places like Minneapolis, half of the people who are fired get rehired, right? And that's a trend that we see all over the country. That's not an aberration in Minneapolis. That's actually pretty standard in a lot of cities across the country.
And you were working in the Minneapolis school system when Ferguson happened.
I sure was working in Minneapolis. I was working in Minneapolis public school. I lived in a lot of the major cities. So I'm from Baltimore and still am a resident of Baltimore, and lived in Minneapolis when the protests started. Lived in New York 12 years ago as a middle school math teacher. So yeah, Minneapolis is a hard place. I used to manage all staffing for the school system in Minneapolis, and even then, the racial disparities in the education system were so deep there. Despite the fact that the city has enough resources to offer a quality education to everybody. Um, so yeah.
So you weren't surprised that this became ground zero.
Not surprised at all. You remember that when we think about Minneapolis, it was they protested in solidarity with Mike Brown, and then there was the Jamar Clark protests, and now it's this.
Do you worry at all about trolls and opponents and that the stuff you're trying to do is really important stuff. You're also going to have a lot of opposition. You're going to piss people off. Have you worried about your safety or anything like that?
Yeah, so when I think about my own situation, I try not to stress out about it. The first person ever permanently banned from Twitter was banned for raising money to try and get me killed. The FBI is visiting my house. I've been sued by 5 police officers in 2 cities. We won all of those at the first level, got them all dismissed, and then an officer in Baton Rouge appealed, and we are actually appealing to the Supreme Court right now because it was held that I could be held. It was found that I could be held civilly negligent for an injury that he sustained at one of the protests that I was at. So we will be hearing back from the Supreme Court any day now about whether they're going to hear that case. My phone got hacked. There was one day I was on a panel. Next thing I know, my phone says, "Please activate your phone." I'm like, this is really weird. I like don't really understand. Um, and and then I realize that somebody has called Verizon. I find out later that somebody's called Verizon, and they have used my social security number, which got dumped on the internet. They use the last 4 of my social to get into my account, posing as me. They tried to
Uh,
change my phone number on the phone, and luckily you actually can't change your phone number over the phone, thank God. But they did change the SIM card over the phone. So they reset my Gmail, they reset my Twitter account, like they just wreaked havoc until I could get back access to my accounts. Not too long ago, my address in Baltimore got leaked, and I got about 70 food deliveries in the span of 3 days. So it has been, it actually has been really, it's been a long 5 years. And I know what I risked. I also know what so many other people have risked. Um, but it is worth it because I think that we have a chance to change history. I think that we have a chance to change the trajectory of the country, to save so many lives. And that to me is worth it.
are there a couple other people? I mean, you're probably the most prominent of all the activists in this particular space, but are there some people the last 6 years that have come along? Like, do you feel like you have people flanking you that have profiles that are growing and are gaining the same kind of influence? And if so, who are they?
I think that the reality is that there are so many incredible leaders happening at the local, state, federal. Like there are so many good people. So I spend most of my time around Brittany Packnett, who's an incredible leader. We met each other in Ferguson together so long ago, and Samuel Sinyangwe, who does all of our data, and he is just a star. And I actually met Sam. I met Sam on Twitter, actually. Like there were all these tweets about like who is a leader and da da da, and I got tagged in all this stuff. And Sam was just a guy on Twitter, and he was like, "I want to help out." Da da da. I was on my phone. I was like, "DM me." He DM'd me like some ideas. We got on the phone together. I was like, "This makes a lot of sense. Let me know what I can do." Never met him before, so then we like started working together. It was sight unseen. And then one day, I'll never forget. I'm still literally in the street. He calls me. He's like, "I just quit," and I'm like, "Quit? We ain't got no money. We ain't got no like." What are you doing quitting? And he was like, I believe in this work. I want to figure out how to do this work with you. And we've been together ever since. And it's been great. So those are the 2 people that I spend the majority of my time with. But there are so many incredible people all across the country doing good work.
How are you funding Campaign Zero and all the stuff that's coming out of it?
So it's a good question. We've gotten donations recently, which has been really helpful because it's funny, people would see me like on Colbert or something, and they'd be like, they must have all this money. It's like the team that I'm closest to, like we literally had an average of $160,000 per year for the past 4 years. that we split amongst ourselves and the people that we got to like help us out. We called in a lot of favors. We had a lot of volunteers help us do this stuff. That's why the websites are beautiful, but they definitely look like we made them in the middle of the night because we did. It was like we just have to do this stuff really quickly. So we did it without a lot of money, without a lot of sort of paid resources, but with the best of intentions and the right focus. So this is actually the first time ever where people have donated to us now. There are all these donations, and and that's really powerful. But that's actually the first time. Like, this is the first time we even have resources. So it's funny because when you grow up poor, right? You're like let me ask a favor for this. So like the thought that we actually could hire somebody is so crazy because we couldn't before.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say, what would you do with more resources? Because I think if there was ever a time to raise more resources, it's right now. So what would you do? Like, what would be? Let's say you were able to pull in an extra 250,000 or whatever. Like, where would you spend that money?
yeah, so we're actually working on, so we launched a scorecard around California. So if you go to policescorecard.org, we rated all the police departments in California, really powerful. It's the first time that data had ever been used to do that. So like, we're really proud of that. But we're actually rolling out a scorecard hopefully soon that is all the police departments in the country in a city with a population of more than 50,000 people. It's incredible. It has taken us a ton of time to try and figure out to get all the data in one place because nothing like this has ever been undertaken before. So if we got money, we'd actually probably find help to like scale that up really quickly. We've been doing, I personally still code contracts every morning. Every morning I like get a new batch of police union contracts. I find the coding, I like put them in the right buckets because I've been doing it that's like what I do in our work. But we can actually train people to do that. And we would probably do that. We probably hire somebody to manage volunteers so that they could, so that we can, all these people keep reaching out, being like, I want to volunteer. And like, I just don't have a chance to do that right now. Um, so we would probably look for capacity. And we also, frankly, want to help build a cadre of policy experts on this stuff, because as organizers, we believe that the data, the policy that'll change people's lives is something that anybody can understand. That we never will create a system that says you have to go through me or come to me to do good work. So we want to redistribute this knowledge as quickly and as effectively as we possibly can. We just need support in how to do that so that we can like teach these cohorts of people all across the country how to look at the data, how to use the data, and how to frankly like expand the data in ways that we might not even know.
It feels like you're in the very early stages of doing something that will have a dramatic effect on a lot of things, because the data at some point becomes irrefutable, and I think people are trained to read data now from whether you're a sports fan or whatever. You're just kind of used to this stuff. You think of where we were in the mid 90s, even with like DNA evidence in the OJ trial, and people are like, what's that? I don't know. And now think where we are in 2020, people get it. Like, they understand that stuff. I had to ask you quickly about, a lot of people. You've a lot of people in your life, a lot of celebrities, and everybody who has a big platform is trying to figure out how to use that platform going forward. And I think there's pressure on famous people like there's never has been before. Like even Michael Jordan did a statement denouncing the George Floyd murder. I know
Did
we're
it?
supposed to call it death, but I'm going to call it murder. But all these people are trying to figure out, all right, people love me and respect me. How can I steer them in the right directions? What kind of advice do you give whoever, a famous NBA player who reaches out to you and says, what can I do? How can I help?
Well, we do with them what we did to you today, right? We walk them through what the data looks like and then what the solutions look like. And the reason that we don't just say like post this thing or do this thing is that you are smart enough to understand every single thing that we're doing. You can do it, right? And the
Yeah.
more that we arm you with that information, the better ambassador that you can be for the cause. Because what we don't want to do is like you post it, then somebody asks a pretty basic question, but you feel like you don't really understand, and then you actually lose the message. These messages work better when you can put it in your own voice. So when you can explain to people why the police shouldn't be able to shoot into moving vehicles, that matters up to us. So you're not just like DeRay said it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, right? So when people reach out to us, we try to do these little work sessions that are like an hour long, and we try to pack as many as many of our friends or cohorts as we can in. Like you were in one that I think was pretty big or bigger than we've
Yeah.
normally done. That's what we want to do. We want to help people understand what it is because people are smart enough to understand.
Right. Give them the ammunition, and then it's up to them how to use it. Equip them with all the data. Yeah, it certainly it was eye opening for me, and I felt like I've been reading a lot of stuff really the last week, and a lot of the stuff you brought up, I was just like, Jesus. Can you do the thing really quick for the audience that you did on that Zoom about the say think of your safe place?
Yeah, so there are two ways that we help people sort of reframe the concept because some of this is about structures and systems, but the other half that's really big is the way people conceive of what safety looks like. That for a lot of people, people think of the police as sort of the thing that keeps them safe. So the first is, I've been in a lot of rooms and people say to me, "Are you saying that the police should never kill somebody?" And what I say to them every time is, "Tell me somebody that matters to you. Tell me a kid that matters to you. Tell me somebody you love. When can the police kill that person? When is it okay for a police officer to put a bullet through your daughter's head? What's the thing that she could do that you're totally fine with the end of her life? Is it a bank robbery? Is it arson? Is it petty theft? Is it a car chase? Like, what's the thing that you're okay with the murder of your child?" And every time people are like, "I don't know." It's like, if you don't know, if every version of what your kid could do, they come home alive, doesn't mean that they don't have a consequence, but they come home alive, then every parent should have a kid that comes home alive at the end of the day. The second thing is really pushing people to reframe their understanding of safety. So we ask people to think about the place where you feel the most safe. And then we ask them, are the police there? The police aren't there. The police are not in the space where you feel the most safe. And that's how we know that that safety is not about how many police officers there are. Safety is about resources. The places that are the safest are the places with the most resources. So the room that you felt the most safest in was probably secure. It probably had food. There probably were people that you loved there. There were memories. And we think that everybody should be able to have access to whatever was in your space that made you feel safe.
You know, we have an interview coming up after this one on this with that Pete Carroll and Steve Kerr did with Greg Popovich. And I don't want to step on that, but he made a great point that I just wanted to throw at you really quick. He was saying how people's attitudes toward police violence need to change the same way that it changed with drunk driving. And how we were in this point in the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s when people just got in the car and they drove. I know I did it in college, because nobody was telling me it was a bad thing to do. And then Mothers Against Drunk Driving and all that stuff. And within 10 years, it changed. And it changed in all of these ways where now it's not a good thing to do. People know that. They don't, you get a DUI, it could be something that hangs on you or you could kill somebody. There's all these terrible things. My kids are going to be aware of that when they're old enough to drive and they're old enough to go to parties and things like that. I was not as aware of it in the 80s. Do you think we get this way with police brutality? With what happened with drunk driving? Do we get there with police brutality over the next 20 years?
Yeah, I don't plan, Bill. I don't plan to be fighting this issue for 40 years. I think that we'll fix this in our lifetime. And that's a big claim, right? Because when we think about the last 100 years of civil rights work, the police is one of the only institutions that has remained largely unchanged. But we know way more about the way the system is functioning than we ever have before. We just know the mechanisms, we know the inside machinery. And I'm hopeful that if we put people out in the right direction, that we will get the outcomes that we want. I really do believe it. I think we just got to focus people. We think about 8can'twait.org as a first step, that there are a set of things that we'll be releasing, but this is like immediate, this is actionable, it's very clear for people. And we want people to understand that today because it can change today. It can. If there's anything that the Trump administration has reminded us, it's that the government can move as quick as it wants to. Whoever thought you could ban whole people from the country on Twitter, we would have laughed at people if they had said that before. But again, the government can move. You think about COVID, the government told us that there weren't enough resources to go around. It's like we figured out how to feed whole cities, kids, breakfast, lunch, and dinner in a matter of days, right? Like the government can figure it out if it needs to, and we should force the government to figure this out.
So it's 8can'twait.org. And it's 8can'twait.org, but it's the number 8. And it's part of Campaign Zero. Hey, listen, tell people how to donate to Campaign Zero.
If you go to joincampaignzero.org, then you can donate there. But there'll be a donate button on 8can'twait.org as well, so that you can donate there. It's a project of the Campaign Zero. Campaign Zero is a 501c3. We have a tax ID number, and you can donate right there. If you don't want to donate via one of the link, then you can just email me directly at DeRay@DeRay.com. Very easy.
I really admire what you're doing. Thanks for coming on. Good luck with this.
Thank you. We can win, Bill. I think we'll win. I can't wait to come back and talk to you and be like, "Whoo, that was so hard.
We did it.
Really, yeah, but we did it.
We'll pour champagne on each other. Thanks again.
Great, cool. Talk to you later.